this next session is really about economics, and our two speakers are going to be talking about geodesign from very different economic points of view. The first is Chris Markuson, who's spoken at previous summits. He's the Director of Economic Development, and he's the Geographic Information Systems lead for Pueblo County. He's a senior advisor to the Board of County Commissioners and has been implementing GIS technology to do what he calls economic gardening, or what others have called this as well, which is basically enabling small businesses to have the kind of competitive capacity that big, large businesses have. He's used this to really help revitalize Pueblo and has received a lot of recognition for that work, both from Esri as well as he received, has also applied some of this technology in Haiti, where he received international recognition from the United Nations. Chris received his BS in landscape architecture from Colorado State University, and his talk is entitled "Using Geodesign to Build a Sustainable Economy, One Small Business at a Time." So please welcome Chris Markuson. Chris.
Thank you, Tom. As Tom said, I'm from Pueblo, Colorado. I am very honored and humbled to be here today in front of you all. Thank you for having me. A little bit about Pueblo, Colorado. Pueblo was formerly known as the Steel City, or the Pittsburgh of the West. And our economy was a sole industry-based economy, and that we were really a steel town. That is no longer. Back in the 1980s, the steel market fell out from underneath Pueblo, and almost half of the population in Pueblo left. So at the time, the economic development folks that were in the community had a really ingenious idea. And their idea was what we would do as a community would be to build a war chest of a half-cent sales tax so that the individuals within the community would start a fund that they would recruit businesses to the community. And that worked fairly well. In fact, they basically created an economy that did not exist by diversifying beyond steel for a number of years. But recently, in the last 20 years, that model has been wildly unsuccessful. Things have changed. We in my department at the county, we were looking at how can we do something to improve our economic development picture. And we had a lot of issues that were going on at the time too. And so some things that were happening is that we saw a lot of businesses really leaving the community. We saw a lot of job losses and a lot of turnover. We saw abject poverty still going on in the community, and that was problematic. And a lot of the things that we were looking at pointed to economic development as something that we needed to improve. So our community is about an hour and a half south of Denver. Yes, I know you all have heard of Rocky Mountain High and our recent initiatives in Colorado. I did not bring samples. They don't let that on the plane. But we are known for Pueblo chili, and unlike those hacks down in Hatch, New Mexico with their flavorless chili, I knew I'd get a rise out of those. The chili in Pueblo is very, very flavorful, and it's just wonderful stuff. So when we were looking at our overall values for Pueblo and what we wanted to do in creating a new economic development program, was that our economic development initiatives, we felt that they should have a few things in common. Number one, we felt that they should be sustainable and that they should really promote some economic resiliency. We did not want to jump back into this boom and bust cycle by having a single industry. We also feel that our economic development should be improving the quality of life and not degrading that. And we would also like to capitalize on the intrinsic character of the community. Much like our chili being an identity to us, we would like to make sure that all of our economic development worked on some of those things. So I'll warn you now, I am a landscape architect by education. GIS is at my heart and soul, and a little bit of IT. I am not an economist, but apparently I'm qualified to play one on TV. So what I had to do in order to really figure out what we were going to do with this program is learn a lot about local economies. And so I'll share a little bit of that knowledge that we learned with you today, but also talk a little bit about some of the issues that we'd seen. So Pueblo has had some fairly large successes in bringing these companies to our community, but Swift and UPEC and Columbia House, those are long gone. They've actually left the community for someplace else. We did not want to create that model again, but we also wanted to figure out why did they leave. And we've also had a few other community companies that have come to town, like most other communities. We have an AT&T call center. This isn't unusual. But the problem with the AT&T call center in town, which was touted as a huge economic development win, is that it pays like almost $10 an hour at the highest. And so the majority of the employees that work at the AT&T call center are single working mothers with 2 children or more. And so when you do the math, a job that pays almost $10 an hour puts you at between $15,000 to $20,000 if you can get full-time hours at the place. You're living below federal income, federal poverty guidelines. So in total, what we've seen is that the vast majority of individuals that work at AT&T in Pueblo are also recipients of public benefit or welfare. Another big win was Grupo Cementos de Chihuahua, a concrete factory that came to town. And some of the issues that we've had with things like these kinds of industries is the amount of pollution that is brought by that type of industry, as well as the outlay that had to happen in order to bring that company here. The incentive was very, very large. A massive concrete roadway that would support the trucks coming in and out of the facility was constructed, which is now, guess what, needing some maintenance and it's falling into disrepair. So that's something that we really wanted to avoid. The other thing that we looked at is doing an analysis of what it costs for us to do economic development. And if we look at geographic areas within the community, obviously the further out you go from city center, the cost exponentiates in terms of that development. And so when economic development was occurring, it was happening on the outskirts of town. And that was basically bringing with it a lot of cost to the community that we could not afford, and we still can't afford. Maintaining roads, providing police services, stormwater services, sewer services, et cetera, get much more expensive on the outskirts of town. So we really wanted to look at that and make sure that we didn't go down that path as much as possible. So in learning about this economic development project, and being a landscape architect, I think in the design process. So the inventory that we went through was, well, what if we were to start Pueblo from scratch as a new community? If we were to come out to Colorado and see this scene and say, hey, we're going to start Pueblo from scratch. We had a lot of discussions. Well, what would we do first? And some of us were saying, hey, let's build a government. Markeson County, how cool would that be? It sounds like a great thing to me. Others were saying, well, maybe we should build some houses and approach it like our neighbors to the north in Colorado Springs. Build houses and they will come, and therefore there will be a lot of things going on. And others were saying, hey, let's build some businesses and bring some revenue. And really, from all of the information that we found, building a business is really the core need of the community. And so especially if that business is able to capture capitalize upon the unique intrinsic character of the community and produce a product or a service that cannot be found someplace else, so it can be competitive on a larger marketplace. So some of the things that we looked at in this inventory of things is how this local economy works. And the concept of what we call primary jobs. Primary jobs are essentially when a business sells its product or service outside of the geopolitical boundary of their community. That is a primary job by its definition. And the quantity of the product or service that's sold and the dollars that are brought in really defines the overall wealth of the community. So we were looking at this and saying, okay, we need to figure out a way to bring additional dollars into the community by helping businesses look and sell their products someplace else. So one of the things that we were looking at here is, just to illustrate how this works, if you've got these primary employers in your community, Well, they have needs, and how does the logistical flow of dollars for the economy work? Well, typically, if you've got employees in a company, they need a place to live. And so you are, by your very nature, creating a residential industry. The next thing that happens is that you need to have some things, so the basics that the businesses and their employees need to purchase. And I kind of drew my own food pyramid for my kids. I think beer, bacon, burritos, and bourbon, the four food groups, fall into this retail industry sector. And you got to have those kinds of things. I don't think there's much else, but anyway. And then lastly, when the government levies taxes in a variety of ways in the community, it is intended to resupply those police, fire, public safety, et cetera, infrastructure services back to those folks. So it's an engine. The thing about economic development that we found is that when you go out to other communities and say, hey, come to our town, it's usually done on the auspices of, hey, our place is cheap and we're easy. We will give you free land. We'll give you tax abatements. You don't have to pay taxes. We'll even build a building for you. And oh, by the way, look how little you have to pay your employees living in our community. I'll tell you what we found as with that is brings a commodity industry to your community. And what is a commodity industry? Basically, it's an industry where anybody, whatever is being produced, can be produced anywhere else. And with the advent of the internet, I'll submit to you that a call center is no different in Pueblo, Colorado than it is in Bangalore, India, or Mexico, or China. In fact, sometimes other places speak better English than we do. So these commodity-based industries, we really don't want to hang our hat on those. The other thing about it is that in offering incentives, the game has become very, very lucrative for moving businesses from place to place. At any particular time, there are about 50 to 100 businesses per year that are really seriously looking to relocate to other communities. And in order for the 25,000 communities in the country that are competing to bring those folks to their town, the incentive pool that they have to offer is very, very large. In fact, just recently, Connecticut went on record in basically paying over $1 million per job for a pharmaceutical company to come to Connecticut. So we looked at that and said, wow, what's the cost-benefit ratio with this? And it is very, very difficult to do. Poor Souls in New Jersey paid out $61 million in incentives a couple years ago and only gained $42 million back in revenue. So that's a net loss. We don't want to do that. So looking at precedents, other communities, and how they've done some interesting things, we found a few communities that were doing some interesting stuff. One in our own state, in Littleton, Colorado, they had created a program that allowed them to triple their sales tax revenues in a 14-year period. That's pretty impressive. They were cited for innovation in a variety of things. Some other places, San Luis Obispo here in California, have done some really interesting things where they looked at business retention and expansion. And they jumped from Forbes magazine's 21st best place to live in the country to 7th in 1 year. That's pretty impressive. And itty-bitty Valley County, Nebraska, with a population of 4,500 people, they were doing some things with business retention and expansion that netted 80 new jobs and $80 million in new investment in 6 months. So we were looking at that. So this slide's here in Pueblo. We're illustrating I'd rather not be up a creek without a paddle. So here in what we were looking at is the true sources of job growth. So part of the things that we found too is that between 75 to 95%, depending upon the region, of new jobs are created by small businesses. And in Pueblo County, 84% of all the jobs in the community are within businesses that have fewer than 10 employees and have a gross income of less than $200,000. So we were asking, well, what do we need to do? How do we get started with this? And what do these entrepreneurs need in our community? And I've heard a lot of times, get out of the way and give them a cocktail napkin, because apparently that's all they need. We do have an example of that, and this is we have a company called Solar Roast Coffee who actually concentrates solar energy using mirrors. They started with their parents' satellite dish and IKEA mirrors, and found a cheap way to roast coffee. These entrepreneurs, we found that they need a lot of things, and we work with them to identify some things. We've quantified them into a list. Number one, they need basic business infrastructure, the things that they need to get their job done. Telecom, the things that the community can provide. They need market information. They need detailed data that they can look at how to sell their product or service. They need access to markets and access to capital. They need talented employees, business training programs, peer networks, and an entrepreneurial culture in the community. So we sought out to create that list of things. So in doing this, what we were looking at is how do we hit the pavement and how do we get running with this? And so we're looking at finding the entrepreneurs that already exist in the community, give them the tools that they need to succeed, create this entrepreneurial culture by basically being an open door to folks, and finding some partners. And one of the things that we were looking at is what is the low-hanging fruit that we can capitalize upon? And one of those is to look at creative industry. And we've had a lot of momentum recently in the arts and so forth, and capitalizing upon that. So we created 3 elements of the program that basically are our objectives in capitalizing in our goal of serving the community. So looking at building infrastructure and improving the quality of life of the community is one of the things we're looking at. And coincidentally, as a GIS department, we were really doing a lot of this already, and this makes a sense why we are doing what we're doing. Looking at things like floodplain administration work that we were doing, historic preservation work, we were doing a lot of that, and looking at old housing stock and how that impacts the local community. Broadband and telecom is a big issue in Colorado, and proliferating that for the last mile. Public safety, traffic and parking, et cetera, et cetera. Many of the things that GIS folks do throughout the country. The second piece to this is really the nuts and bolts of what we really offer. And we have business analyst desktop licenses. We really depend upon this information. This slide shows a business that we worked with that came to us and said, hey, I want to send out some postcards and get some new business. We mapped their customers, and it turns out that the vast majority of their customers are in Manhattan, far from Pueblo, Colorado. They really didn't know that was the primary source of their revenue. But what we found is that they had a very specific target audience, designers and folks that lived in the village in Soho that were using their service. What they do is they do a unique process where they reproduce fine art. And they have an interesting online following. So using the information that we were able to analyze, their customer list, develop a tapestry profile using business analyst, and a variety of other little things, came up with a strategy that gave them a zip code level based marketing strategy that looked at Lower Manhattan and allowed them to say, we're going to advertise in these 3 different methods in this area. Here's how much we're going to spend. Here are the trade magazines and other publications that we can be advertising in. All of that information, by the way, coming out of Business Analyst. And here we go. We've got a great program. So some of the things that we're able to do with that is to also provide all of that analytic information and visual information to contextualize this complex business environment. So simple things like customer density modeling, spatial analyst function, to inside a business analyst utilizing the graph capabilities that basically segment individual customer bases into core and developmental populations, and then developing marketing strategies that capitalize upon the hobbies and lifestyles of those individuals. And the other thing that we use extensively is the reports that are behind the scenes in Business Analyst that append indices or basically best case scenarios for a variety of modeled circumstances in advance. Do these people watch, one television show versus another, or do they watch TV at all? Some of those things are really easily done within Business Analyst. The other thing that we looked at is we knew that we couldn't do this project in a vacuum. And so we sought to bring partners in with us, and found there are a lot of willing folks that really have Pueblo's best interests at heart, and found a lot of different things that we could do. And so we've been going door to door, honestly, with our partners and equipping our partners with GIS-based information, including reports as well as maps, to basically create a net for any entrepreneur in Pueblo. There is no wrong place for them to go. If they end up on somebody's doorstep, we are all operating off of the same bits of information to provide entrepreneurs in terms of growing and so forth. But we are also cooperating in a way that it's gained some attention, and that we've realized that we need additional partners. And so some of the financial folks in the community have come on board, and I've also been entrusted to do some things with Pueblo County to manage the county's revolving loan fund. So it's a small loan fund. It's $800,000 that we're able to loan to small businesses, and that is an annual appropriation. When I first started, that fund was like 12.5% capitalized. Right now, we're at 93.7% capitalized. So we've had a lot of interest in that loan fund. And so we've been evaluating what is happening. And so some of the things that we've seen in this small neighborhood, we had some targeted efforts within downtown Pueblo, which also was designated by the governor as a creative district just recently. They call it the Creative Corridor. In the 2011 to 2012 data, we've actually seen a dramatic change in density of jobs in the creative industries of folks that we've worked with. And so we're seeing some very specific and targeted zones that there are some increased densities. And you can see here, this area here has grown considerably, as well as this area up here in 2011 and 2012. And this one here, we did not plan for that, but that's interesting. That's a commercial district that is just outside of our targeted area, and so we're pretty happy with that. Of course, we struggle with some things like what's going on down here. Why did we actually see a loss in jobs in that area? But in total, we've seen a large number of jobs increase. In fact, we were about 253 new jobs as of about a few weeks ago, 45 startup businesses, $11 million in new wages, a number of businesses with a larger sales growth, and a sizable $28.2 million economic impact in the community using the models from the university. But you know, that's great, especially considering that our budget really is business analyst software and just keep doing GIS. So you know, we're pretty pleased with that. And I like this slide. It sort of epitomizes where we've come from and where we're going, and that we're a community that was rooted in steel, and we've done some interesting things, and we're keeping moving forward, and we have an interesting path ahead of us.